Hey, you know what? YouTube tells me that if I don't hook and entice you within the first 30 seconds, you're going to click off and go watch a cat video. How about this? Let's look at these headlines. And let's compare that one to this one. Okay, now if that doesn't entice you to stay, I don't know if I can convince you, and I'm not sure what would. We have to look at it this way. Too many workers are getting injured or killed on the job, and often the culprit is an ineffective new worker safety orientation, or worse, one was not done at all. And really and truthfully, the evidence is leaning and pointing in that direction. And I'm here to tell you it's more than just a to-do list, a matter of checking a bunch of boxes or sitting that person in front of a computer. If I just described your new worker orientations, you know what? You need to hang around. In this video, I'm going to give you some tips that are going to help improve your new worker safety orientation, help keep you in compliance, and you know what? Improve new worker safety, and who knows, they may even level up your health and safety culture. Because realistically, when you look at it this way, first impressions are everything. Oh yeah, and new worker orientations honestly prevent injury and save lives. First things first, let's talk about what are the points that go into a new hire safety orientation that make it a best practice. Let's have a quick look. Realistically, the very first thing that you need to be reviewing is the basic worker rights in your jurisdiction. Now, I did a whole series on worker rights in Canada, and as much as I like the watch time, I really do.
He really does.
It isn't about sitting that person in front of a computer and watching Provoking Safety YouTube videos. You need to inform the worker about their rights, make sure that they understand them, how those rights are entrenched within your health and safety program, and how they're lived out in your organization. That leads me to the next step, or the next piece, and that's the company safety policy and program. Realistically, it's the health and safety foundation. You need to make sure that throughout this orientation, the health and safety program is reviewed, the expected worker conduct, and the other needs of the worker from the program are emphasized. You need to make sure that they understand company rules and general health and safety reporting. Part of that is, of course, going to be verification of the worker training, certification, skills, and knowledge. Now, a lot of this should have been done at the point of hiring. You know what? I'm not going to touch on whose fault it is or whatever if it doesn't get done, but realistically, it needs to be, verification needs to be a part of the new worker safety orientation. Take, for instance, you're going to have that worker working at heights. Wouldn't you want to make sure that they have some fall protection training, or at least confirm that they're putting on a harness properly, depending, of course, upon your jurisdiction?
Yes, I would.
Now, the next thing, of course, is the hazards that are associated with the job. If you've been diligent and done a good job of documenting the hazard assessments, that worker will be able to review those hazard assessments for their position and be familiarized with them. Of course, it's more than just reviewing a bunch of documents and signing a form. And I'm going to cover the hows a bit further in the video, so I want you to stick around. Of course, with any hazard assessment program, you have to emphasize the safe work procedures and the controls that go along with it. So these safe work procedures have to be added to the list. Now, if you've prepared the job hazard assessments properly, they're up to date, they're going to be complemented with a list of controls for every task and the hazards present. And some of these are going to be good administrative controls that are going to include safe work procedures. And also there has to be a note of things like WMIS or GHS, and of course, transportation and handling of dangerous goods if they're part of the worker's job. Other things and other controls such as PPE need to be addressed during the safety orientation. It's too late if the worker's already doing work and there's deficiencies with the way they use or maintain or their awareness with the PPE. It has to be addressed during the worker orientation. You also have to take the time to ensure emergency measures are reviewed, things like first aid, evacuation, muster area, shelter in place, and so on. And then finally, of course, how safety is communicated in your organization. I'm talking about how reporting of unsafe acts and conditions, incident reporting, what to do if they're injured, and how to report injuries and first aid needs, and of course, emergency contact and notification requirements. Now, I bet you've got a big question. How is all of this done? I agree. I've just given you a whole laundry list of stuff to do, and how do you do it? Well, let's look at that. Realistically, a hybrid approach is best. Now, as I said before, you can't just sit the person in front of a workstation. I'm not against computer-based training. Absolutely, I think it's a good thing. After all, I make YouTube videos. But there has to be more to it than that. you have to split it up. Don't just put them in an office chair in front of a workstation and expect that they're going to retain everything. Because one thing to note, the old adage is the brain can only absorb what the butt can endure. Now, if the training is captivating and entertaining, you know what? They can likely handle it for a long time. But the question needs to be asked, when was the last time that you participated in some very captivating safety orientation in front of a computer? Leave me a comment, let me know. So split it up. One thing you want to start with is an introduction. You know what? Introduce yourself and the company and take that time to give your personal endorsement on how you see health and safety with the organization, and please make sure it's a positive stance. Talk about the workers' rights within the jurisdiction, and of course, by all means, emphasize how these rights and health and safety is lived out within the organization and its operations. Now, the very next thing to do is a worksite tour. Worksite tours are important for a lot of reasons. And let's go over a few of them right now. Worksite tours give you the opportunity to focus on emergency exits, muster points, and a lot of the emergency procedures such as evacuation and shelter in place can be reviewed during that time because the worker has this physical association with those things. It also provides you the opportunity to address PPE and the locations where it's needed. You might be able to point out signage, and it gives you the opportunity to ensure that the worker is familiar with the PPE they'll be using and confirming if they have it or how they're going to get it. The other thing you can be doing is pointing out first aid stations, first aid attendants, and first aid kits, and what to do if the worker needs first aid. Now, during the worksite tour, you can also be doing things like introducing the worker to their new co-workers, and this helps immensely, especially if you're going to be introducing them to the members of the Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee or their safety representative. Very helpful. Now, you can also point out lunchroom and the company policy on where to eat, because a lot of organizations frown upon eating at the work site. They insist on eating in lunchrooms or special designated areas. You can also point out washroom facilities, because when nature calls, they can't be put on hold or asked to take a message. Now you can take the time after you've done this physical worksite tour and given that worker the opportunity to have a look at the worksite. Now put them in front of a workstation and they can look at some of the following and read and research about it. Once the worker's seated in front of the workstation, they can be reviewing and reading about the health and safety policy and of course the program along with the expectations, especially where the program applies to them. They can be going over hazard assessments, their own job hazard assessments, the associated controls, and the complementing safe work procedures. They can review emergency procedures that weren't covered in the physical tour, but you know what? When it comes to emergency procedures, there's no amount that's enough for review. Honestly, there's not. And they can review their rights and responsibilities as workers within your organization, including the responsibilities they have about reporting incidents and unsafe or dangerous situations. Now, it's important to note, computer-based material can be as simple as a collection of documents for the worker to read, or an elaborate and extravagant video-based process. There's really no limit. I'll leave that up to you. Now, once the introduction's done, once the worksite tour is done, once the computer-based training's done, I bet you think you're done. Really, you're not. If you want to really and truthfully embrace this notion of best practice, what you should be doing is meeting with the worker before the end of the day and just asking them some questions that you've prepared in advance to note if they were actually paying attention during the tour and the computer-based training. A lot of times workers won't ask questions, they'll just nod. This gives you the opportunity to confirm their understanding. So go ahead, ask some questions. It's not necessarily a test, though some organizations do that. You want to make sure that they weren't just watching provoking safety videos on YouTube. Is it over when it's over? Once again, the answer is no. As I said, if you want to adopt a best practice approach, you have to consider that the hazards that this worker is exposed to as part of the tasks that they're performing. You might want to make sure that they're being observed by another experienced worker for a certain amount of time. It may be just another day or a few days. I'm going to leave that with you, but I would say the amount of observation should be based on the different hazards and different tasks that they're going to be performing. Now, the final thing is, any set of controls that is being implemented needs to be monitored for effectiveness. How do you monitor for effectiveness? Excellent question. Let's have a look. So there's a few ways. Number one, you can get that new worker feedback. Honestly, it's a good notion to do. Give them a questionnaire or send them an email, but make sure that your questions are not simple yes or no, that they're open questions that are going to require some answers. And then you can actually have a look and adjust what you may need to as necessary for your new hire orientation process. Another thing that you can do is involve the Health and Safety Committee. Realistically, they're an important part of your health and safety program. They're the eyes and ears for the stakeholders at different levels. So make sure that you get feedback from them. Have them involved with even the creation of your new hire orientation. A couple of other things that you want to note, of course, are inspection reports, especially those reports that revolve around unsafe acts. Were new workers people hired within the last 6 months involved in any of those unsafe acts? If so, you might want to figure out why and then adjust your new hire safety orientation accordingly. And then finally, of course, is incident reporting. Were new workers or new hires involved in any of the incident, and what was their level of involvement? You'll need to investigate further and make sure that one of the deficiencies that's found isn't your new hire orientation. Hey, thanks for hanging out and thanks for watching. Please do me a favor. Have a look at the video a few times. Use these best practices. I'm going to leave a lot of notes in the description. Feel free to use them and use them as a guide in creating your new hire orientation. But if you're using these, you're adopting best practices, and then you're doing what I always ask every video. Not just thinking about safety, not just talking about it, but you're actually doing it. You're being safety influencers, you're provoking safety. So have a look at the videos up in either corner. Let me know what you think. Until we see each other again, and by golly, I hope we do. Take care. Bye for now.